Hello everyone, this is Mirko Guerrini and I welcome you to the Jazz Transcription Clinic, a monthly interviews podcast where we talk with accomplished jazz doctors about their lives, career and their personal secrets on the art of transcribing. If you want to improve at jazz, stay tuned and follow the Jazz Transcription Clinic on the socials for more content. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is being recorded. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Jazz Transcription Clinic podcast. Today's guest doctor is one of the most acclaimed guitar player in Melbourne. He's a senior lecturer at Victoria University and he's a practicing musician that is really sought after by many bands and many vocalists. He will talk with us about how to play your instrument, in this case is guitar, and make it sound as a band. And use transcribing strategies to implement this skill. So without any further ado, I will introduce you to our guest doctor for today in the clinic is Mr. Steve Rando. Welcome.
Thank you, Mirko. That's a very, very generous introduction.
I really mean it. I have had the privilege to play with you on many occasions now, and I always enjoyed your, I would say, your clean ideas, especially in comping. I always feel that you dug really deep into the art of comping, either vocalists or soloists, and that's a big skill, to have, and you make a lot of people happy when they play, for sure.
Well, it's an area of transcription. I mean, we're going to be discussing transcribing.
Yeah.
That we don't always look at transcribing accompaniment. We usually always look at transcribing the solo area. So it's an interesting area. Yeah.
It is indeed, and so. I know that when we started discussing the opportunity of participating in this podcast, you were a little bit worried because you said, but you probably need a more jazz musician, even though, categorize musicians is really hard in these days, isn't it? But I thought that you were a great addition to this podcast because transcribing is not an exclusive thing that only jazz players do. I know, for example, some classical colleagues that are transcribing some versions. They maybe they don't rewrite down, right? They don't write down what Glenn Gould did on the Art of the Fugue, on that specific recording, but maybe they are listening 100 times to a specific passage and then try to reproduce that specific sound that they hear, and that's the same thing.
Yeah,
that's transcription as well. So thanks again for participating. And
my pleasure.
If you are happy, I can shoot you the first question.
Sure.
Which is, why do you transcribe?
Yeah, it's a big question. If I digress and I think of when I first started, I wasn't really even sure why you would transcribe. I know my teachers would encourage me and say, you should transcribe. And that was a period where you listened to your teachers and you trusted them and you did what they said. You just didn't even question them. You thought, okay, there must be something in this. I grew up also purchasing a lot of guitar magazines that had transcriptions in them. So I was very interested in how they did that. And I knew that when I read those transcriptions and tried playing them, I could play the material, but I never retained it. I was never inside the material. And then I was reading more about players like, Steve Vai had transcribed a lot of Frank Zappa and things like that. And, he used to say I'd spent 2 to 6 hours on, 1 minute of music or 30 seconds of music, and I got really interested in that process. But for me too, it was a way of integrating my improving my ear, because I think I learnt music. I could read music quite well. I was taught how to read music. My ear was a little bit behind, so it was a way for me to develop my ear and listening skills, and probably integrate the listening, performance, and theory. Because as I started to transcribe, I started to analyze music, and it was a way of building a vocabulary. It really was that. So I guess a lot of the things that I would have started transcribing were probably more kind of blues solos, because I was into blues guitar, and it was a really interesting process, because the style was the same. It was over the same 12-bar blues tune, so you were given it was a good thing, because you knew what the progression was going to be. You didn't have to work that out. And the players would use the same scale. It would be 5 pentatonic notes, so it was kind of easy to work those notes out. But it was about the nuance of the player. So I started realizing about their rhythmic placement that made them different, and trying to learn where they were placing notes that I wasn't, and their touch and nuance, and getting into their sound, and I guess trying to understand why they played something and what kind of story they were trying to play. And those things sort of revealed themselves more and more as you transcribed, where you could see the overall picture of the solo, how it would start slowly, or the register in a lower register, build up to a climax, and hopefully you would see that overall picture, and it would take it from there. But then I got into the way that I tried to learn jazz, because that was very new to me when I started college, was to listen to jazz musicians and try to work it out, which was very difficult. I found it very challenging to transcribe and to notate what I was hearing, and probably a lot of the first transcriptions are full of lots of errors. But these days it's probably a necessity for me to transcribe and notate, because as a teacher, I need to notate material for students to play. If I'm learning repertoire, which I need to do a lot of, if I'm playing in a project, I will need to learn that repertoire and notate it. I find the way that I personally retain repertoire is I need to write it out. I need to visually write it out. Another thing I do a lot is, probably a lot of people may not have spoken about this, is I transcribe chord progressions all the time. So it's a consistent thing for me to notate chord progressions to popular songs or material. And by just doing that process, writing it down, I retain it, just for somehow it stays in. Same thing when I notate, I can play along with things and remember things, but if I write them down, I retain them a lot better. So, yeah.
I'm with you 100%. And I remember that the whole transcribing process is also a very long but profitable path towards your good relative pitch. Many times I've been asked, do you have perfect pitch? Because to transcribe, lots of solos. And I don't have perfect pitch. But through the years, I think I was able to develop a good enough relative pitch, to the point that, for example, if I transcribe a saxophone, now I don't need the instrument anymore. And that because I know so well the sound produced by a saxophone that it's like if I can visualize all the notes. I know exactly what the notes are. With other instruments, it's a bit more difficult because I don't play those instruments. So, for example, if I try to transcribe one of your solos, maybe I need to check a couple of times to check the references. So, a couple of times I need to check with the piano or the saxophone whether I'm on the right note. But once I have a good reference, then it's a matter of intervals. And so the point is that even for chord progression, I was terrible at it. I couldn't even transcribe a simple Beatles song. Like a Yellow Submarine was obscure. If you ask me, what's the chord progression 20 years ago? But then doing more and more, and same as with you, I started playing jazz, but I also joined some rock bands, some experimental bands, pop bands. So I was in the need of transcribing a lot of bass lines and chord progression. I was playing a bit of keyboards. And you know that especially in young rock bands, usually charts are something that never existed. So you need to produce your own chart and write out the chords, to the point that I remember years after, like 10 years after started transcribing, I could recognize chord progressions by ear. Like you play a track from the middle of a trumpet solo, and I could tell you, if I knew, of course, the song, but I could tell you what song was that by the sound of the chord progression. And that's not, an amazing skill that I only have. I just developed it. I got it like for free. Well, not for free, for like 10,000 hours of work. Yeah. But I got it, and I think that's something that everyone can have it from that work.
It's interesting you talk about being able to hear on your instrument. I think that's the case for me. Like, there's a chord that's played on the guitar. I can tell exactly what that chord is and how it's fingered. On the piano, not so much. I'd have to work it out. But and also by doing that as well, when I first started, the guitar is a really complicated instrument. I think Mick Goodrick has got some formula that every note repeats like 3.2 or 3.6 ways. So that's why guitarists are terrible sight readers. So, there might be an A and you'd be like, well, is that the A on the 5th fret on the 1st string? Is on the 10th fret? Is the 2nd string? It is on the 14th fret of the 3rd string? Like, I couldn't tell that. You know what I mean? Like, but then your ears can tell. I can hear where that is because it sounds different where it's played on the fretboard and stuff like Absolutely. That. So your ears you pick up those things. And also, I think that idea of listening to. I find it really interesting because I've had to transcribe a lot of bass lines because when I do sort of like a one-man show thing where I have to accompany singers and I've got to play the bass line, the chords, sometimes the melody as well. So I'll have solo arrangements that I have to really listen and tune into the bass lines and get my ears hearing that frequency. While, I notice when, singers just hear melodies, they don't hear bass lines, and vice versa. Students that play bass parts don't necessarily hear the higher parts. So I think it's really important to kind of be able to hear everything, and isolate parts as well.
And then you will become Sting, right?
Well, he always said that he was the leader of the band because he sang the melody and he played the bass line and the other guys just had to fill in the middle, the colours in the middle.
I always thought he's unbelievable. I always had such an admiration for him because I saw him live. That tour, I can't remember what album they were presenting, but there was Vinny Colaiuta on drums.
Yep.
And it was unbelievable.
Was that the Ten Summoners Tale? Tale?
Probably, but Yeah, probably. It's that album with lots of odd meters in it, like 7/4,
Yeah,
5/4.
yeah.
Yeah, David Sanchez on keyboards. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful album. And I thought it was incredible because always playing with Vinny Colaiuta is already difficult if you are just a bass player, right? But you
Yeah.
are the bass player and the singer. And he was doing an amazing job, so relaxed, so settled, with everything and able to control the rhythm on two different
Mm.
level, being perfectly linked to the drums, but the voice is still free to float above. It reminds me of the Brazilian like guitar and singers like João
Yeah.
Gilberto.
Yeah.
There is that version of Desafinado sung by João Gilberto, and it's just guitar and voice, and it's like he sang after he played the guitar, but he's doing in real time, and the voice is so out, you know, from so disconnected from the guitar. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I think
I
that
love that stuff. Yeah,
yeah,
it's like it just floats across the rhythm, And what's fascinating about that stuff is, like you spoke about that Sting album. I remember that when you actually, go to learn those songs or analyze those songs, you realize, like you said, they're in odd times, but they don't feel like they're in odd times. They
no,
just feel very natural.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly. So I guess you have kind of replied to the second question, which is what do you expect to bring home with transcriptions? And you said you're looking into rhythmic placement, the touch of the player, the nuances. Do you want to add something else?
yeah. Definitely the rhythmic thing was very important for me, especially in just learning subdivisions. I think the way that I learnt subdivisions and now can hear subdivisions or sing subdivisions was transcribing a lot of funk music, which had a 16th note type of thing, or blues that had a triplet bass thing, and then understanding how those kind of knowing what those patterns sounded like. I guess I'm always trying to capture the way somebody is playing something, the way they go about playing it. It's never about the notes. It's about their touch, especially their articulation. I think I'm attracted to players that have a very vocal quality and play with a very kind of legato kind of sound. Especially for me, the guitar players I like are very influenced by horn players, and that's why I love the sound of saxophone and trumpet and things as well, where it's not everything is just picked. There is sort of like slurring and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I'm always trying to hear those things and trying to understand how can I articulate those things so they sound more lyrical, that's probably what attracts me to why I transcribe certain players as well, or why I avoid not transcribing certain players. So just dynamics, feel, placement. Some of those things are just really difficult to talk about or teach. I think, when you're teaching a student, things like tone, time, touch, they only come from listening. And they involve what I call purposeful listening. You have to be really aware. I think that's one great thing that comes out of transcribing is you heighten your awareness, and every time you listen to something, you hear something different.
That's great. And I think you just gave me the title of your episode, which is It's Never About the Notes. It could be actually the subtitle of the podcast in general, because that's a constant theme that came out with all the guests. It's never about the notes. And again, it's another difficult step to make the student understand. Your work starts when you just got the notes. It's not finished there. That's the starting point. When you get the notes, that's the preparation of your work. And then you start working on, how he, in my case, for example, how did the player tongue that note? How can I make that sound? I remember that when I was young, so we are talking about 350 years ago, a close friend of mine gave me a vinyl of a Charles Lloyd album. So Charles Lloyd wasn't a big name for a long time. He was recording for ECM but he played with a young Keith Jarrett, so he had his own path. And I discovered this player, which I loved because he has a very, very nice and fluty sound on tenor. So I started getting obsessed. How can I get that sound? That was my quest at the time. And I figured out that by simply moving my upper teeth forward on the mouthpiece, I could get closer to what I was hearing. So that journey of experimenting and searching towards a sound, I think is one of the main essence of the transcription while you do it. It's not to get that D. And anyone is able to play a D, but am I able to play that D?
100%.
Yeah. And sometimes it's difficult with students. The students say, I got the notes. Now give me another solo. No, wait a minute. Yeah, you are playing the notes, but you are quite far, from playing what you hear. So we need to work on that.
Sometimes a really good supporting thing, it's probably going to be different from saxophone, but also being able to see the player play it, because especially on the guitar, because there's no real, it lends itself to so many different ways you can play the instrument. So if you actually see also somebody play it, you go, that's how they get that sound right. So, okay, so, John Scofield, when he's doing that kind of funky thing, he's really picking back on the bridge. That's why he's getting that brittle sound. Or, somebody like Jim Hall, it's very left hand, and where his pick is closer to the front humbucker pickup or whatever, and that's a warmer tone. So that, I think those things can really help you. Also, seeing them can help reinforce that too.
Yeah. Good. And how do you choose the tracks that you are going to transcribe? Do you have like a strategy, or this might be the next gig, or or
a lot of that's dependent. So there's a few things there. If it's for me, it's probably something that I'm really curious about, and it needs to touch me. So I hear something and I'm really curious about it, or it really touches me, and I go, wow, I need to understand that. I need to know more about that, or I want to get better at that. So one of the great things about your podcast is that I reached out to you straight away and said, thank you so much for this podcast. You've inspired me to get back into transcribing, and that's probably transcribing for me. So I've started transcribing a lot of Kenny Burrell and Wes Montgomery, which has been something I've wanted to get more into and look at that language and those players. I think if I'm going to play on a tune, maybe it might be a standard, it makes sense for me to transcribe somebody else's approach instead of starting from nowhere. Then I look at how somebody's approached it that will inform my approach. And maybe I might transcribe 2 or 3 people. The All Things You Are, I might look at someone like Bill Frisell, Jim Hall, John Scofield, and look, is there a common approach? What can I take out of it? What sort of lends itself to me that I understand that I can put into my own playing? But then there's also there's a fair bit of transcribing that I need to do just to be a working musician. So it might be a show and I need to transcribe all the guitar parts to be able to play that show, to retain it. Teaching, I guess the way I approach teaching is, as well as imparting what I think students may want to look at and need to look at, they might ask me, I'd really like to learn this song. I'd like to learn, I'm really into John Mayer and I'd like to learn one of John Mayer's solos. So for me, I will transcribe that so that I can teach them where it's coming from. And then by doing that as well, I can introduce them to other music that shows them, well, this is coming from Albert King, or this is coming from Freddie King, or this is coming from Eric Clapton, and they can then see those kind of connections. So, and then I guess I was just thinking yesterday, had an ensemble group and the students are playing, they're doing a Motown tune, they're playing like My Girl. The violin player couldn't pick it up the string solo, so I had to actually, like a lot of classical musicians, they're good at reading, but they're not great at hearing. So I just transcribed the solo right there in the lesson and then gave it to him and he could play it. You know what I mean? So it just comes to a bit of a, I guess you just, it's a resource. You need it to be able to do what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so to dive a little bit more into the factual thing, so how you do it, what methodology you apply when you transcribe, and have you started using any software in recent years?
Yeah, I use the same software. I think both Julian and Remy in your other podcast have talked about a software called Transcribe. Yeah, yep. Which I use. I think it's by Rising Software. It's not very expensive either. I think it's only about, I think it's $50 US or something. So yep. Whatever that, what's that, $3,000 Australian, it's depending on what our dollar's doing at the moment. So yeah, and you've got it for life, which is great. It's not like a yearly subscription either. I really like that. I use that all the time. I must say, all the time if I'm transcribing it, even when I'm teaching, and also as a practice tool. What I really like about it is it's very easy just to import MP4s into it. You're able to label sections, which makes it very easy to look at sections. This is very important for me if I'm transcribing solo guitar arrangements as well, where I need to know where I am in the song, and look at specific sections. You obviously can slow down, which I don't tend to slow down too much, but I do slow down a little bit at times just to hear certain things.
Yep.
And it also has you can change the pitch, and that is very useful for me too, because a lot of times singers will say, here's 15 songs, Steve, I need you to learn these 15 songs, and then there's no rehearsal, but they're in different keys. So instead of learning the songs in the original keys, I can actually learn them in the transcribed keys. The voices can sound a bit chipmunky, but at least I'm playing along with the feel of the tunes while I'm learning them. Yeah. So that's a really useful function. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you notice, but when I do my live version of the podcast where I transcribe solo, I recently started using this platform called Soundslice, and it's quite similar to transcribe because you can create the bars. And I don't know if you watched any of the episodes of the live transcription.
No.
I have transcribed a Charlie Hayden solo, a Michael Brecker solo, Chet Baker solo, and you can actually write the music inside the web platform. So you can import a track or a video from YouTube, and you have actually control. You can create the bars and you can write the music and see the bar line, the music going together with the music. You can slow it down, you can loop sections, and I started using it also for teaching. It's great. You can loop 2 bars and put it to 60% and still hear the inflections and the nuances of it. But there are many many softwares that can help us. I was looking the other day into a software that Remy Bolduc suggested, and I think it's very interesting. It's called Anthem Score.
Yeah, I heard him talk about that. That sounds really interesting, actually.
And I had a look. There is
yeah,
a 30 days trial. I'm going to try it and maybe also do a podcast episode on it. But actually, it goes by frequencies, so it can analyze the frequencies, and it can isolate some frequencies. So like sometimes is great, if you want to get especially like a piano thing and you need to understand the left hand, is good if you can isolate that procedure, that range of frequencies. And apparently it tries also to give you the notes on the spot, but we don't know. I don't know yet how accurate it can be. So I'll be happy to try it. But yeah, there are many softwares there. Yeah.
Do you write things out on paper, or do you write things on something like Sibelius or Finale?
That was my next question, but
I'm
happy. I'm happy to move on. I usually, if I have time, so if I don't have to do a transcription for work, or maybe I rush to do a podcast episode, if I have time, I first memorize it, the whole thing. And then writing is just a matter of archive and possibly analyze if I think it's worth to analyze. But if I don't have the time, or if I have to do it for someone else, I write it on paper first, and then I put on Sibelius. I found out that it's much faster that way, because writing on paper, I'm still much faster than on Sibelius. Especially jazz solos, where the rhythm sometimes requires a bit of reasoning. You have to understand, he plays like 9 notes in a bit and a half, so how I'm going to write. But when I write, I just put the 9 notes, and then I can figure out later, and it's a bit faster. But with this platform that I mentioned with Soundslice, I found it very quick to write it down. A couple of weeks ago, I did a transcription of Chet Baker on But Not For Me, and it took me probably 30 minutes to transcribe the whole track. So introduction, the vocal, the trumpet solo, and I wrote it down immediately on the platform. So that's very quick, because you can loop 1 bar and then you stop, and then you write using your computer keyboard. So you write the notes and the rhythm, and you move to the next bar. That I found is really powerful. And
my process is probably similar to yours. And I've heard you actually talk about this in other interviews, that I like to listen to the music a lot. So before I transcribe something, I'll listen to it over and over, even in the car, not intensely in the car, because if I do listen intensely, I'll probably stack the car. But I'll be listening it over and over. And I'm a big believer, if you can sing it, you can play it. So I have to get to the point where I'm able to sing it. And then normally when I go to transcribe, sometimes, what I still do it on paper because I'm faster, and I've got a rubber because it's easier to sort of, if I'm to a second, sometimes you think maybe not, I think when I first started to transcribe, it was really overcomplicated, because a lot of the transcriptions, if you ever see blues transcriptions, like people in guitar magazines, like a 12-bar blues transcription, it looks like something like Bach wouldn't have even been able to play. It's just, they're 12/8 things, and the subdivisions are all over the place. And then when you hear it, you go, oh, that's just that. That's really simple. So I try to keep them very simple and just write things like maybe pushed or rushed or a little bit behind the beat and things like that. And sometimes I just actually notate the rhythm on the paper and look at where the placements are. And if I've heard it enough, I can sort of fill in the notes later. But I've got a lot quicker at using Sibelius. So I've now started putting them into Sibelius, which is kind of, they just look a lot better. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you don't want to analyze them. Yeah.
I'm doing the same. I mean, I'm writing on paper and then I give a better look, like a publishing look with Sibelius, and then I can share it. Yes, absolutely. And how long does it take normally to transcribe? Let's say a jazz solo, but if you want to talk about, I don't know, a pop song is of course fine, but I'm very interested in understanding and make clear that this is a slow game. It's not something that you can rush into it.
Look, the first couple of things I ever transcribed took forever. I just didn't think I'd be able to do this. It was just like, but I was persistent, and everybody that I read about or spoke to me about it, teachers, they said, it's going to take a long time, the first one, but it's going to get easier and quicker the more you do it. And
after usually the first 20 years are the worst, right?
So, look, pop songs are really quick. Like I know that, I think it becomes down to sort of you become familiar with the material. So the more familiar you become with the material, the more you can recognize it, what's going to happen before you even do it. So I think it's more what takes a lot longer is things that are unfamiliar. And they're probably the best things to transcribe because they're going to push you as a player and you're going to grow by doing things you can't do. So if it's a pop song, I will transcribe all. Sometimes just in one lesson, I could have the whole song transcribed. Like even while the song's playing, I've already written the whole chord progression or written all the written parts like bass lines and things like that. That's really quick for me. If it's a guitar fingerstyle thing, I need to spend a lot of time hearing all the intricacies of it and being able to work out, and separate the melody from the bass and what's happening in the middle. And sometimes the middle can be a little bit, you hear things where you think that's an open G and it's not, and it's an overtone of another chord or something's ringing on. So it requires there's a lot of smoke and mirrors when it comes to solo guitar things, where something stops and something takes over, but it still sounds full. It's like holding the pedal down on the piano so things are ringing over. Especially if I'm transcribing things in different tunings, which I do, like transcribe things in dadgad tunings, and then I'm hopeless notating that stuff. I actually just use tab to notate it, even though I hate tablature. It's just easier because I don't know where the notes are. But if I'm doing a jazz solo, it won't take me long to play it, but it just depends on what I select. Most of the things I've been selecting recently are sort of fairly bluesy, fairly melodic, fairly mid-tempo or ballads. So it doesn't take too long. But if I was doing something that was a lot faster or out of my depth, these are all guitar things too, so I'm familiar with the instrument. If I'm transcribing something that's not on the guitar, like saxophone, like some of the things on the finger, like not only is it transcribing, it's a problem solving thing of how do you make that work on the guitar. Sometimes those kind of notes just don't translate to a logical fingering, or how it could be played. So then that's a different thing, because it's not only a transcribing thing, it's like a problem solving thing. Exploration into
getting out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And yeah, when I did the Charlie Hayden solo transcription, it took me quite long to figure out. There is, at the end of the solo, he's playing a lot of double notes on the double bass, and that was completely new
That's hard to hear.
for me.
Yeah,
To
yeah,
hear,
yeah.
and of course it's a ballad, so the rhythm is quite loose. So even the question how I do notate this, it was a great challenge to take. But I'm hearing your point, and I guess the question is interesting. And I started this podcast after I heard a friend of mine, an Italian friend of mine. He's the guest on the first episode of the podcast, and he transcribed 5.5 minutes Michael Brecker solo on Recorder Me with Steps Ahead, and he literally nailed it. He plays, from memory, 5.5 minutes. It's long.
Wow.
It's long and it's perfect, and it's Michael Brecker. And so I asked him, how long did it take? And he said, oh, well, I wanted to finish it. I wanted to do it properly. So I would say I finished memorizing it in like about 8 months, he said.
Okay, wow.
And, he's a good player. He's really a good player. So it's not that he had to learn the technique. He knew everything, but to learn. And he told me, it's just 5 minutes and it took me 8 months, but that's the time that is required. He was doing like 1 hour, basically 1 hour every day.
Yeah.
And it's a long time, but then what you get in return is massive.
Yeah, it's a massive investment, I think, and it's kind of like putting money in the bank, and you're just you've got lots there that you can withdraw, and you'll be withdrawing it not knowing you're withdrawing. You'll be playing a gig and things will be coming out, and you're playing where did that come from that you've deposited? I think that's
a great analogy.
That works. Yeah.
I
was thinking
notes.
too.
Yeah.
Mirko, that, a lot of the times when you are transcribing, I think it's your interpretation, like we could transcribe the same piece and they'll be very different, but as long as it makes sense to you or it makes sense to me and we get what we need out of it, that's what's important.
Yeah, you transcribe what you hear, that definitely. It's like the spelling is not that important, but the sound is important. That's definitely right. And this is a bit of a controversial question, but have you ever felt you were copying someone? Like, I don't know if you ever fell into a phase where you were obsessively transcribing one guitar player and then you started playing like him and people started saying, oh yeah, Steve, yeah, I know, the one that is playing like, we all fear that comment back. So how do you escape?
I don't think I've ever had that. I think you can only be you. It's a bit like saying to you, Mirko, with your voice, the way you're speaking, that you sound like somebody else, and even if you sounded like somebody else, it's still your voice and you're saying things that are different than somebody else. So I don't necessarily think that's ever been an issue. I've had some funny things where when I first started getting into jazz, somebody said to me, oh, you sound exactly like Jim Hall. And I didn't even know who Jim Hall was. I was like, who's Jim Hall?
Yeah.
But then I listened to Jim Hall. I said, oh, I love Jim Hall. That's the way I think about music. It's melodic and it's simple. And then that sort of explored some things in that, I really got into the way he played. I think as well, if you transcribe lots of different players, you'll then just be an amalgamation of the things that you like. Yeah, more than just, maybe that could happen if you lived in a bubble and you only listened to one musician, and that's all you knew, and you didn't even play with other people, because I think if you play with other people, you should be listening to the people around you when you're playing all the time as well.
Yeah.
I don't think that can. Yeah, I just don't know if that's possible. Yeah, maybe it is, but I don't think it's something that people should be worried about. Yeah.
I'm just asking because sometimes is one of the main excuses of coming from students. Oh, no, I do not transcribe because I don't want to sound like somebody else. And, that's not the point, of course, of transcribing.
No.
That's not. And usually I suggest, well, you will never try to play a line that you learned in a live gig unless it comes out, as you said before, with a bank deposit. Sometimes I can hear myself playing some lines, and only after I play it, I can, that's coming from a Stan Getz solo. It was nice, but it came out like if I have stored somewhere, and it's there ready, but I'm not deliberately think, now I'm going to play Stan Getz. That never worked.
It's the same thing with language, isn't it? We're speaking where we've learnt vocabulary, we've learnt words, and we're drawing on those things as we communicate. But we're not like, I'm going to use that great quote out of this book now that's out of context, So, I mean, the way that we have learnt music or way we've learnt language growing up is imitating our parents. We don't sound like our parents, but we had to learn language that way. I think you find your own way. I actually think it's not a bad thing. I think it's a good thing to have somebody there that you're modeling on, because they're probably really good at what they do. And that way you can learn about what they do well, and take those kind of strengths and things, into your own playing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you transcribe a guitar solo, for example, how do you practice it?
I obviously play along with the recording. So I'll basically I'll use the loop function in transcribe and play certain sections. And normally I'll build the tempo up if it's fast. So I might start slower and just keep building the tempo. That's a great thing about it. I'm on 80 now. Great. I'm pushing towards 85. I'm getting to tempo. So I will, even though I play along with it, I think what I try to do, there's a couple of things I will do. If there's something I really like, a phrase, maybe it could be just like a 2-5-1 progression or something, I might take that out and use that as a thing to practice. So I'll practice in every key and do that, and maybe start with the original idea and then start playing around with it and expanding it. So it might have started off as a, say, Wes Montgomery line, then it's starting to sound a bit more like me finding the way I do it and playing around with it a bit. And I think I just like to, if I transcribe something, I like to get into that kind of player's head and play, like maybe I might play it note for note, but then I don't. I kind of want to play along. I might play along with the backing track and just think like that player and try to channel what the things, those kind of, not the notes, the things like maybe the sound, the rhythm or the articulation, and just stay in that kind of space. So I'm influenced by that player, but I'm not trying to play like that player. And that will go from different players. I mean, I might be in B.B. King kind of headspace. You know what I mean? So yeah. I'm just trying to play. I'm playing a lot of B.B. King solos. I'm thinking about B.B. King's vibrato and where he plays and some of the sweet notes and just being really dynamic with the phrases. And I'll stay in that space and I'll just play. Sure, I might transcribe one of his solos, but then I'll just play over a couple blues channeling that. And hopefully that kind of stuff comes out when I play. Yeah.
That's good. And do you have any specific strategy to incorporate what you learned with the transcription into your playing, like how you store those things in order to have them ready when you need them?
It's a good question.
Or it's just a process that once you spend a couple of months on that track, maybe it's all there, and you leave it to, I don't know.
I think maintenance is very important for me. So if I transcribe something, I'm thinking more at the moment specifically solo guitar arrangements that have specific maybe right hand arpeggios and things, and other counter melodies and things going on. If I transcribe something like that, I want to play it I play it a lot so that I can play it, but then I hopefully get to a point where I can be flexible with it, improvise within it, and play. It doesn't have to be as rigid. So I guess it's about maintenance in those things and maintaining those things. And yeah, so it's probably playing things or listening to things a lot more, I think. Re-listening to them or revisiting them. Even a transcription that you might have transcribed and then re-listening to it, replaying it, and then hearing something different to it. But I think, again, I will take... Well, so one thing I will do, actually, Mirko, is a really good example. I was just thinking about the way I might approach practicing improvising. This is maybe if I was playing on a blues, is I might find some kind of rhythmic motif, and I will just then use that rhythmic motif to put my own notes to it and stay with that. And so that I'm thinking about expanding my rhythmic vocabulary, and I might just have two rhythmic motifs that I bounce from but put all my own notes and inflections to, but I know where that rhythmic motifs come from, and try to expand it that way. So I think more with transcription, I actually think more rhythmic than notes. It's about expanding my rhythmic vocabulary. Yeah.
That's nice. I thought your answer could be reduced to the magic word practicing. But yes. I like the word. Yeah. The word maintenance. It reminds me of you want to have the car always ready to go, and you have to have a good maintenance, or even your instrument. You have to do some maintenance in order to not have bad surprises. You go to a gig and something happens because of bad maintenance. So that's also with things that you hear in your head, you need to maintain them fresh and ready to go. It's a good word. Thank you.
I think it's a very challenging thing as a musician, is trying to maintain what you've got and then add another room to the house, and it keep expanding. Yeah. Mm.
I mean, that's not a secret. All the giants of music, what they do, they still practice a lot. We keep listening to interviews to our heroes. I remember years ago there was this interview to Chris Potter at the NYU, and the guy who was interviewing Chris Potter told the students that he was shocked because Chris Potter called him a couple of days before and asking for a room on the day to practice. So, can I have a room, before my workshop to practice? I said, yeah. How long for? Sure, that's possible. How long for? Oh, maybe 5 hours. Yeah, and he said, you are Chris Potter. You don't need to practice 5 hours. And Chris Potter said, I can help myself. If I don't practice 5-6 hours every day, I feel bad. My body feels bad. And I also know I had this friend of mine who's actually a nice story. He toured with Pat Metheny like 5 years ago, the Italian guy. And it's a funny story because he was a student of mine, and one day he transcribed one of my solo, and I said, give me that transcription and I won't do anything to you, because that transcription has to disappear. But that's not the story. He told me that Pat Metheny is crazy about practicing. He practices everywhere, even taxi rides, from the plane to the hotel. He's in the taxi, playing the guitar. And, you don't become good.
That good. Yeah.
If you don't
exactly
do
right.
it. So
there was a recent podcast with Pat. I mean, he's probably my favorite guitar player of all time. And the recent podcast, he says he gets up at 4 a.m. every day and practices before everybody else gets up. That's the reason why he's the best, Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. And Steve, the last question is the dumb question. And sorry for that, but I think after we spoke about, very high and inspiring things, we need to touch ground. And so the silly question is, what is your favorite transcription of yours?
It's kind of like asking which is your favorite child.
I know. I know exactly. I hate that question when a journalist asks me who's your favorite player. But that's one of the reasons why I wanted to include this question into my podcast. Yes, I know how much we hate to narrow those things down.
I've probably got two then that come to mind.
I can accept that.
Is that okay? Yeah. I actually, we're just talking about Pat Metheny, so that's good. I would probably... I've transcribed a lot of Pat Metheny, but there's... One of my favourite albums is with Charlie Hayden, who you transcribed the bass solo with the Michael Brecker album. On the Missouri Sky album, there's a song called Message to My Friend.
Yeah.
And I remember when I went and I saw them play that concert live in Canada. And this is when you used to take your Walkmans to gigs and, record the gig. And I remember recording the whole show, and I sat down with the tape back then, because I think, I had one of those, maybe one of those Marantz machines that's, you put the tape in and it slowed things down a bit and even kind of thing. And I remember transcribing, he played this incredible solo that I haven't heard him play on the recordings of it and even on YouTube. It was just amazing. And I just went, I have to learn that. And I did. I remember transcribing and learning it. And that was one of those ones that I played note for note and played along with the recording. And I think I played it live once with a bass player, and I just went, I have to play that. I'm going to play Pat's solo. It's just too good. And I learned a lot about his touch on his touch on the guitar, his restraint, and the elasticity of where he pushed and pulled things. It was a really great insight into how to, again, craft a solo, how to tell a story, how he started very slowly, where there was movement in cadential points, where the interplay between him and Charlie Hayden, that was really interesting, and how where Charlie would be playing busy and Pat would not play as much, and where Charlie would give Pat space and he would create movement. I think that was really important to understand how two people play together and improvise together. And I've always been interested in that. Even like there's albums with Jim Howell and Ron Carter. It's like they play together. And I think for me, I'm very fascinated when people are telling a story together.
Yeah.
So that would be one. There's a great one. I remember transcribing. It was a really big one for me because I had to transcribe jazz chords. So there's a version of My Funny Valentine, which is not the version that Jim Hall plays with Bill Evans. It's with a really great trumpet player called Tom Harrell. And I transcribed his solo on that, which was, I basically learned a lot of those kind of, playing 3-note chords, because I was playing big jazz chords then, and Jim Hall had these beautiful little 3-note chords that were mainly the third and the seventh and some kind of extension, and would move and weave that within the solo lines, because there was no piano player. He would play a line and then comp for himself, and that was again very important to understand that you could be that kind of, play that role of a piano player, or you could basically suggest the harmony without having another harmonic instrument there, and the use of small chords. That was like a bit of an aha open me. Oh, play small chords, get out of the way. Don't, that's why the bass player's been looking at me angrily, because I've been playing these big chords, or I'm getting in the way of the soloist with the upper extensions, stay in the middle, so it was actually, and that was one of those ones, I think that was another song that I actually spent a lot of time analysing. It was the first transcription where I analysed it to the T, and tried to work out how it all worked. Yeah.
Thanks so much for participating in this podcast. I had a lot of fun talking to you, and thanks to all the listeners, and stay tuned for another great episode of the Jazz Transcription Clinic podcast. Thanks, Steve Rando, for being a guest today.
Thank you very much, Mirko.